Truly amazing figure. Personally, truly amazing figure. Many controversial things about him, which we'll get into.
We will definitely get into.
But I must say, in general, yeah, an amazing figure. There were many figures in his time that were like that. But again, it's very impactful for me, especially nowadays, is that he was a polymath, which is very important. In my opinion, it is something that we should still strive to be as a person in the modern day. There's nothing wrong with specialization, but understanding at least the general principles of fields similar to yours. So for example, as a historian, you should have at least a knowledge of the general principles of sociology, economics, etc., politics, etc., to be able to understand, to be able to look critically at the history you're looking at.
This is a very good point. Yes, I'm going to grab this now right there, because I keep saying it in lectures, very many times actually. We now become specialist idiots. I mean, I'm using this word. It's just simply, you are a doctor. Now, I have recently, by the way, I had a conversation with a medical student. Now, this medical student happens to be originally from Palestine. And I mentioned the issue of Palestine. This boy had no idea what was going on in Palestine. You understand? I mean, this is critical. I find this is critical. I mean, there is a problem, right? Don't you need to know that? So indeed, I mean, why I respect this person also very much, Ibn Khaldun, for one of the main reasons is exactly what you mentioned just now, Yasser. He's a polymath, and we don't have that many nowadays. And I think that why I like my studies also very much is because I had a main topic, a main subject that I studied, which was political science, but within this main subject of political science, I had history as a main subject under the main subject, and then the subcategory of concentrating on languages in the world, which again you need in order to be able to read sources, in order to be able to understand what's happening in South America. If you don't know Spanish or Brazilian Portuguese, for example, then you don't have access to really the authentic sources.
Exactly.
Africa, if you want to really know more about Africa, you would need to, for example, need some Swahili. You will need to know some Swahili, especially East Africa.
And then the question is, how do you learn those languages? It's very interesting because he mentions that in the Muqaddima. Near the end, we're a bit jumping, but it's something that really stood out for me, which is something you've always mentioned in your lectures, in any of the lives that has something to do with linguistics. The Cambridge method, for example, with regards to not drowning but immersing the person in the language. That's a method that they have pioneered, that they've pushed forward, but it's something that he speaks about exactly in the book.
In the 14th century. Yes. In the 14th century. Now again, come back to the beginning. Who is he?
Grammar is for grammarians. Yes, okay, true.
Very
Who
good.
is he? Yes.
We will speak about it, inshallah.
Jumping ahead of myself.
So guys, I mean, there's so much to be said about Ibn Khaldun.
This video is sponsored by the Muqaddima program. For nearly 7 centuries, Ibn Khaldun's Muqaddima has been read and studied by scholars and students of history, sociology, politics and economics as the single most authoritative and astounding work of classical scholarship in the field of history. Embark on an enlightening educational venture led by Muslim scholars and teachers delving into Islamic history, sociology, economics and beyond. Engage with cutting-edge learning cues and multimedia components, allowing for a deeper understanding of the topics. Distinguish between the lies and the truths of the narratives told, between reliable and unreliable sources. Equip yourself with the skills to conduct deep research and build confidence to combat Islamophobia. Come and strengthen your Muslim identity today. Grab the course in the video description.
Honestly, as you said, he is a polymath, a man with many talents. He was a fakir. He's actually a high judge in Egypt. Many people don't realize just how established he was as a scholar. A very famous Egyptian scholar sought to have an ijaza from Ibn Khaldun. And I mean, there are many things that we can say about the man, but maybe we should begin by talking about his lineage, where he was born, the era in which he actually came about, what
I wanted to actually go into that exactly now, mashallah. You're absolutely right. Yes, you're right. Well, he is originally from Yemen. He has the al-Hadramauti as a main title, right? Meaning Hadramaut is an area in Yemen. Where the Arabs claim actually original lineage from, right? I mean, that's what they say, that the Arabs originally come from Hadramaut. So he was from that area. The lineage goes far, far back. His ancestors moved to Al-Andalus. which was Spanish and Portuguese, Muslim Spain and Muslim Portugal, as they like saying, but Muslim, the Iberian Peninsula, which belonged to the Muslims between 711 and 1492. And during that time, his parents were there. They were forced to flee that time when actually Al-Andalus was coming towards an end, was getting destroyed from within and from without. I mean, we should not forget that the Christians were coming from the north down. Al-Andalus became smaller and smaller and smaller, so in the end we just had Granada as a province, and they had to leave from there. So they decided, they were amongst the refugees who basically left to go to Tunisia, and they established themselves in Tunis, where he was born. So he himself might have lineage and everything will go back, but actually he was from Tunis. He was not from Al-Andalus, he was not from Yemen. Originally, yes, but that's where he came from, Tunisia. And he was a judge, as you said, in Egypt. He spent some time, I think 3 or 4 years in prison. Are you aware of that, guys?
Yes,
You know, he was some time in prison.
He was politically active, which is very important to see that part of his life, because it also translates into his work. His scholar.
Yes.
He was a scholar. Yes, he was trained in the art of religious scholarship, but he was also politically active. Briefly in Al-Andalus, and then furthermore, nearly the rest of his life in North Africa, which is very, very important to understanding his views, the things he says in the book.
What you just said, actually, very important to grab this one again for our students. We need to understand, when you look into a book, when you read something, you need to understand the author's background.
Absolutely.
Because if you want to read Shakespeare, you need to understand the lifetime that he was living. His language is different to what we speak nowadays. Shakespeare in English is different to what we speak nowadays, of course. The same if you want to read Baudelaire. You know, you will have to understand where he came from, his language and circumstances, and so on and so on. So that's number one, I think. We need to take out of this one, who was Ibn Khaldun before I start reading his book, before I start reading his work? Who was this person, and why was he influenced by the area where he was? And what
I love that approach, because as you mentioned, the era was one where the Andalusian civilization was coming to an end.
Was in decline.
Is in decline,
Yeah.
exactly. That already sets the mentality of a person in that era, vis-a-vis the world, vis-a-vis the Muslim Ummah. So he was born in that era. Also, we have to really emphasize his aristocratic background, because his ancestors were all viziers and advisors in the courts of the high dynasties in Andalusia. But he also claims religious lineage back to Hadramaut, as you mentioned,
Yes.
from Wa'il ibn Hujr, who was a Sahabi, radiallahu anhu. And there is actually a narration that Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam made dua for Wa'il ibn Hujr and his descendants until Yawm al-Qiyamah. I mean, all these things are absolutely essential for the author, because in his mind he has a high lineage, both in terms of aristocracy, and he writes about this, by the way, my ancestors did this, my ancestors did that. So that has an impact on what he will say about the political establishment, certain dynasties, governorship, different people in the world. So he's not coming from a perspective of, you could say, a lowly perspective. He is to some extent a bit arrogant, in fact, about his own
I wanted to
importance.
mention that.
Yeah.
You said what I heard actually there are many discussions about Ibn Khaldun, and I have heard specifically somebody saying he was arrogant, which what you're just saying here now might be true. I mean, honestly, it would stain it a bit. The picture that I have of Ibn Khaldun, if I imagine him running around in a Maghribi thobe, as he was described,
Yes.
while he was in Egypt,
Yes.
showing clearly his lineage and showing clearly what he was, who he was, I think it might be true. It might be true, we don't know. We're talking about somebody, a scholar from the 14th century, who is a polymath, who is a geographer, who is a historian, who is a politician, who was a Maliki faqih. His father, by the way, taught him the Maliki
Exactly,
fiqh.
yes.
Okay, that's very important to know as well. He has, as you said correctly, I mean, a massive influence from Al-Andalus. Okay, he's proud of that, by the way, very, very proud. And I can imagine for 1300s in the 14th century, if you would rather want to be from Al-Andalus than from North Africa, although civilization North Africa is very much advanced as well in comparison to the Christian Europe, for example. There's no doubt about it. But he doesn't compare himself to Christian Europe, because at that time Christian Europe didn't count at all. Okay, 1300s. So he actually, traces his roots back to Yemen, traces his roots back to Al-Andalus, and that's what he's proud of, actually.
There is a strong sense of identity for him in these different places. Tunisia, his place of birth, And there's a history why he was born in Tunisia. As you mentioned, when the Muslims were leaving the Andalusian, you could say, realms, they went to Tunisia. You had the Hafsids, you had the Marinids, you had the Mamluks. Ibn Khaldun pretty much served for all of these different dynasties.
Which is amazing, because then that gives him a range of perspectives.
Absolutely.
For when he starts to write the book as well.
Exactly. He's the perfect man, honestly. I think to have captured that part of history, he's a perfect man. He had a finger in every pie, effectively.
Yes.
And he was able to really give you an insight as to what was happening at the time and how dynasties evolve, how they go to a decline, what happens inside the political establishments and the different people in and out of that time. But Ibn Khaldun, we have to remember, was born in the 14th century,
Yes.
1332 to be specific. So some of his observations, some of his opinions may not necessarily be the most politically acute right now in 2021.
Yes.
But nevertheless, he has a lot of things to say about, how the world works. And to this very day, people quote him, as an authority when it comes to history, politics, even linguistics. He had a lot to say about linguistics.
So many things. I mean, just to throw in there as well, diet as well. Diet. I mean, could you imagine that? Speaking about history, speaking about sociology, economics, these massive fields. He also speaks about diet. It's not a highlight, but
Biology,
it's something very
indeed.
important. Yeah,
Indeed.
biology as well.
He explains,
Biology,
yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, this is something, but that shows how they were educated at the time. And this is what I admire. I think our university education nowadays is
Very
really
limited.
creating what I said at the beginning, right? It creates specialist idiots,
Yes.
right? And everything else doesn't seem to be, if you're a doctor, you're supposed to know the medical field, and that's about it. So you're not supposed to know what's going on around you and the current affairs and Palestine and so on and so on. That is something that should not concern you, because you're a doctor. If you wanted to study in Al-Andalus, if you look at sources from that time, even Christian Europeans who would come down to study in Al-Andalus, although they were focusing on a specific, let's say they would come for medicine, okay? They didn't just do medicine. They had to learn certain passages of the Quran. They had to know the Arabic language. They had to know so many things. And this is amazing, I find, subhanAllah. This is amazing.
Ibn Khaldun, people have to realize, has been claimed by different factions.
Many.
For many different reasons. Okay, you have modernists, you have progressives, you have traditionalists, you have Islamic historians.
Social Darwinists as well. Et
also
cetera, et
claimed
cetera.
him, yes.
Darwinism,
Yes.
yes. Their dad saying that actually he was Darwin before
A
Darwin.
precursor to Darwin, yes.
Because
Because of what you mentioned.
Because of what he says,
Yes.
which we will
Yes,
go.
he was able to amalgamate various insights and perspectives and make it one science. We should never forget he actually founded a specific discipline which he called Ilm al-Umran at the time, Ilm al-Umran al-Bashariya. Today we call it sociology, but he knew, he was aware that I'm actually establishing a new science altogether. You could find him, as you mentioned, Yasser, that he's talking about the terrain people live in, their diets, and how these things can actually contribute towards how they run societies, it's just fascinating how
It is fascinating.
and for that reason, the French historical school, the Annales School of Historical Analysis,
What's his title again?
that's another one, yes.
With regards to that you were
Yes.
saying, yeah.
He is considered to be the last of the Greek, you could say the classical Greek thinkers, considering the fact he's actually an Arab, and the first Annales, which is a French school of thought.
Right.
It's really amazing that they've considered him to be the final classical thinker of Greek tradition, although he wasn't Greek, but the first of the, you could say, almost modern thinkers, the Annales school.
How Eurocentric again, isn't it?
Exactly.
There we go again.
They forgot the Arab in between
This
and the
is-
Islamic.
Yeah, it's like,
Doesn't matter.
it doesn't matter. Although, if you read, and I really, when I was reading the Muqaddima the first time, I was thinking, this is what Zuckerberg reads and understands, I thought.
That's a good
This
question,
is, there are so many references to the Quran,
To Islam or to
to
Islamic
Prophet
thought.
Muhammad
Sallallahu
to
alaihi
the Islamic thought, to Islamic understanding and cultural civilization. So many references that honestly, if you don't understand Islam, you don't know Islam, the basics of Islam, you cannot read al-Muqaddimah. I'm sorry, it's not just a history book. It's not about history only. So I really keep wondering still, I would like to ask Mr. Zuckerberg actually if he understood really what he read there. The hadith, for example, the science of the hadith. First of all, what is a hadith? Do you know that as a non-Muslim what a hadith is first? Second, the science of the hadith. Complicated enough for a Muslim. What about a non-Muslim?
The Ottomans were the first people to translate and rediscover the Muqaddima and Ibn Khaldun's ideas. Ibn Khaldun's ideas were there, his ideas with regards to justice, tax, and the cycle of the dynasty within the Ottoman Empire not necessarily connected to him. That's why it was so easily and readily accepted in the Ottoman Empire. But the point is, they were the first Muslims among the people in the world to start then adopting many of the ideas he has in his book.
Beautiful point. You mentioned the Turks or Ottomans. It was around the time, because Ibn Khaldun, being a genius he was, his book al-Muqaddimah was pretty much overlooked for a while. Okay?
Yes.
It wasn't really taken.
While he was alive, while he was...
It was overlooked. The Ottomans or the Turks at the time during the Tanzimat reforms realized they were also going down a downward spiral.
They did, yes, yes.
And they discovered that in his book was almost a remedy for what they were facing in real life.
But it was not even that late. You're right, you mentioned Tanzimat, 1800s. That was not even that late, because actually 1400s, right, at the very beginning,
1500s.
he was really discovered by the, well, can we call it discovered? It was shortly after his death, actually. He didn't really,
not
too long.
Exactly. I mean, yeah.
Well, let's say around 100 years after his death.
Yeah.
That is not really a long time. 100 years after his death, when the Ottomans actually had to translate into Turkish, and they came up with his ideas as well, or rediscovered his ideas, because again, let's be honest, many ideas that he got them from the ancient Greeks as well, right?
Yes, that's why it's the last Greek.
That is quite important to see as well, because now I can see that already. That let's say if I have some of my Greek compatriots here saying, come on, you're praising Ibn Khaldun, but he actually copied everything from the ancient Greeks. No, he didn't copy everything from the ancient Greeks, but he did have a lot of, there was influence there. And Aristotle spoke about a lot of things, and he knew Aristotle, he knew Plato, he knew Sophocles. So yes, many things we have to give them right, that some things were there. But again, as I keep saying again in lectures, not everything that the ancient Greeks said was right and was just taken over and copied, and so we take it with us. No. Divine, the Quran is obviously divine, and for that reason we can trust the Quran more than we can trust what the ancient Greeks said. So many elements had to be corrected later, by the Muslims, and they were corrected. So yes, the ancient Greeks came up with a lot of ideas, okay? High civilization without a doubt, but it was not a divine civilization. There's a big difference here. It was not divine. And this is what I keep saying as well to my compatriots. Yes, we are Greeks, that's fine and nice. Let's be proud of our ancient history and everything, fine. However, not everything was right. Not everything is true and correct, what they said.
Ibn Khaldun would have been aware of that. I mean, he wasn't just blindly taken. And it wasn't only from that perspective, he was taken from different perspectives. His book actually is very detailed. It looks at the history of the Arabs, the history of the Persians, the history of the other empires that were interacting with the Arabs, the Berbers as well. So he looked at various sources. And of course, in classical terms, the Greek historiography and the Greek catalog was also always going to be a factor in any intellectual endeavor. But he was able to actually put a spin to it, something that made it unique in its own right. Unfortunately, we find that most people, the general public, are not aware of this man Ibn Khaldun, what he left behind for us and how we can benefit from him. One of the beauties actually in what we're doing is that we established the al-Muqaddima program based on the principles of Ibn Khaldun and based on the science of the Muqaddima, to enable people to actually have an insight in the classical text and the training that he would have left behind. Because Ibn Khaldun had a very passionate view of education.
He was not only a politician, scholar, and a religious scholar, he was himself in education, and he was teaching actually. Very interesting. He was teaching, and he was teaching also not only religious studies but also languages, for example, which I find very interesting as a linguist myself, actually.
The amazing thing about the Muqaddima program as well, to carry on with your point, is that with the way that the Muqaddima is structured, with the way that Ibn Khaldun has structured the Muqaddima, it's amazing. It's a book that he structured it in a way that it can be taught, because he really focuses on the principles, on the general principles of what he's talking about. He makes it his full-on mission to have you understand, without any biases, the general principles and the principles of each of the fields he's talking about in there. So it makes it much easier to teach, because then when you've understood the general basic principles, then you can go into the specifics, then you can move on, then you can build upon that. So it's brilliant.
I really like that, the way you said it. It was actually, it's as if he was preparing it as a guide to be taught to others.
Yeah.
Very scientific, very kind of methodological.
For almost 7 centuries, the Muqaddima has been widely regarded as the earliest and most authoritative and seminal text in the fields of sociology and history, outlining the core principles and methods needed to evaluate and convey history with a more objective and critical eye. Its celebrated author, Ibn Khaldun, pioneered a revolutionary approach to the study of history and is considered by some historians to be one of the most influential thinkers in his field. Now, for the very first time, students of Islamic history will have the rare and unique opportunity to study this monumental and classical work of genius under the tutelage and guidance of experts in the field of research and education. We offer a wide and varied range of learning experiences as part of the program, with options for students to participate in person during our on-site lessons in London or remotely via our private and secured live streaming platform. Classes are delivered on a fortnightly basis, and all students enrolling onto the program shall receive a complete learning resource pack, including coursebooks, timetables, and admission onto the online student portal. The annual program is available to students as a certificate or a diploma package, with varying subjects and module components as well as a practical assessment unit that will culminate in the launch of student-led history projects and publications, following a panel presentation before a group of assessors. This is a unique opportunity to discover and immerse yourself into the world of Islamic historiography under the tutelage and guidance of experts who will assist you in acquiring the core skills and competencies necessary to conduct your own research and launch your own initiatives. To find out more about the Muqaddima program or to enlist yourself onto this unique and fantastic learning journey, please visit our website at www.al-Muqaddima.com, where you will be able to download our program prospectus, register your interest by submitting an application directly via the online enrollment form.